You've probably heard this saying before. I just want to be comfortable. I've heard thousands of people say this to me, and what they're really saying is that they want an easy life. I want to ask the obvious follow-up question. How do you define comfort? Now, there's two answers to this, but rarely do I get the correct response or even an intelligent response. So I'm going to tell you what those two responses are, because there are two types of people that define comfort. But just before I do, we're going to define comfort, but I'm also going to dispel 5 myths that people have when we talk about comfort. Here are the 5 myths. The myth of security, the myth of comfort, the myth of passive income, the myth of freedom, and the myth of college. So we'll start with the first one. The myth of security. Security for most people is a job with great benefits. That's the textbook message for what security is supposed to be. Job security. That's why people go to college, to get job security. Good benefits, good pay, a reasonable amount of time off per year, reasonable amount of sick days, vacation days, etc. Good benefits, right? However, what we see is that job security comes with a lack of freedom over your time, income, and sometimes even your relationships. Let's look at this. I am a big fan of etymology. Etymology is the study of the origin of words. So let's look at the etymology of the word security. The word security comes from the Latin word securus, which translates to free from care or fear. So the very origin of the word has freedom in it. But the way that people use it today is not how it was originally used. Security was supposed to mean freedom from worry or negative consequences. Think about this. Here's where security comes in. Who here today has freedom from worry, freedom from security, freedom from worry or freedom from negative consequences? So, free from care today means relieved of duty from having to think about yourself. Who has that? Prisoners. Who has the maximum security in the world? Prisoners. Because they are free from worrying about everything in their life, because they know where they're going to be, they know where they're going to eat, they know where they're going to sleep, they know their schedule tomorrow, next week, next month, next 3 months, in 6 months they can tell you what they're going to be, because they have maximum security. So then if that's what you want, then if you want the maximum security, to be free from worry, to be free from negative consequence, then that's what you're going after. More and more closer and closer to security. So then the question is then not whether or not you are free, but the question then becomes, how free are you? Right? Then it becomes a spectrum where over here we have security and over here we have freedom. And the most secure people in the world are prisoners. Over here, the most free people in the world are the people who own the assets, the production, factors of production, who own land, who own businesses, ideas, etc. So let's continue here. As I said, we have notes. I'm going to be covering a lot in today's session. So, maximum security prison, those are the people who have been relieved of the duty of having to think, being unable to move without someone's permission. That's the first myth. What we really want is not security, it's freedom. That's the opposite of security. The second myth that we have to address, the myth of comfort. The goal of comfort is really used by two types of people. Those who know what comfort really is, and those who use it because it's a comfortable word, it's familiar, and they just store it out, but they haven't really defined it. The latter type of people, those people live in a fairy tale. Because if you haven't defined it, then how do you know what you're going after? So then, let's actually define what comfort is. Because what we don't want to get into is complacency. Complacency will rob you of your comfort. Let me explain this mathematically, because we like statistics here. Today in the US, in 2022, well, it was in 2022, inflation was 8%, but usually it is 3%. Okay? between 2 to 4 per year. So these are crazy times and the economy is uncertain, but under normal circumstances it would be 3%, which means that your dollar is getting 3% weaker every year. So if you are earning the same for the next 10 years, after 10 years, your dollar, the same income, would be worth 75% of what it is worth today. This is the myth of comfort. Because if you get to a place where you're comfortable today and you don't grow for the next 10 years, then your life would be 25% worse off. Think about that. So then, do we really want the baseline level of comfort, or do we want to get to a place where we can define it economically as beating inflation, maintaining a similar or growing sense of lifestyle, and keep traveling more and experiencing more life? That seems like a better way to define comfort. But when we put it into numeric terms, into dollar figures, then we go back to what we learned yesterday, which was we need to be aiming for 2 or 3 times what we would spend every month from freedom sources of income. So let's go on to the third myth that surrounds passive income. The myth of passive income. You probably hear this a lot on the internet. Many internet gurus will say, hey, I will teach you how to get passive income yesterday, last week, right? And you have to do absolutely nothing. Let me tell you right now that that is a myth. The only passive income that exists is dividend income. Dividend income. That's the only type of passive income that exists. And most people, the way that dividend income works is that you would need to become rich first with a lot of money for dividend income to be truly passive and take care of all of your expenses. Because usually dividend income is really maybe 4, maybe 3%, maybe even 5%, as much as maybe 7-10% of what you put into the bank. But for most people, it's around 4%, which means that if you are going to live off dividend income alone, you need perhaps $1 million just to see any sort of benefit from that. But it's not whether or not something is passive. That's the myth. So we're correcting it now. It's not whether or not something is passive. It's how passive is this source of income. So then, over here, we have a job which is 0% passive, 0. And over here, we have dividend income, which is 100% passive. You have to do nothing over here for dividend income. But between a job and dividend income, we have thousands, maybe millions of different sources of income that can be more and more passive depending on how you set it up. So, I just want to reiterate this point. Passive income doesn't exist. Stop looking for it. But you can use leverage to increase the value of your time so that you leverage your active time to make more money using technology, systems, or employees. And once you have leveraged your freedom source of income to make you more per time, then you can cut your work hours down to 4 hours a week, 2 hours a week, and those types of numbers. But you're not looking for 100% passive, but you need to start thinking about how passive something is. That's the third myth. The fourth myth has to do with exclusivity. There are many people in the world who believe that freedom is reserved for the rich aristocrats of the world. People who come from perhaps the upper echelons of society, they were born into money, right? These are people who can experience true freedom. But I'm going to tell you today, right now, that I didn't come from money, right? And many of my friends didn't come from money either. Of course, it's a lot easier perhaps for you if you do, but what I'm saying to you is that today, that is a myth. Freedom is not reserved for the people in the exclusive class. That is no longer true today, and that's why it is a myth here. Perhaps a century ago, yes. But let me give you this example. Today is the easiest time ever in history to make money. Let me give you an example. 1 century ago, 100 years ago, it was nearly impossible for a 17-year-old to pick up their phone. Of course, phones weren't invented yet, but it was impossible for a 17-year-old to reach 100,000 people. Today, every 17-year-old with a phone can do that. Now, that alone should tell you that is the easiest time in the world to reach and sell to a lot of people. The skill of doing that, though, is something that we need to learn. But the myth here is that it is not exclusive anymore. Everyone that has a cell phone has access to getting rich in today's society, to make more money, to travel, to live as free as much as anybody else 500, 100, 1,000 years ago. You have it right now. It is no longer exclusive. Let's take this a step further. If we are to believe that it is no longer exclusive, then big businesses are not the only ones that have access to resources. Then how do you go about taking freedom, not building the next Google, but taking it down perhaps to 100, multiple six figures, multiple five figures, perhaps even approaching 7, 8, 9 figures? Here is how it's done with boring businesses, ideas, licensing. And let me give you a few examples here. Car washes, lawn care, window washing, laundromats, rental companies, supply stores. These business models have been working for centuries, and they make just the average Joe that much more effective with their time, where they can approach freedom. These are the people who nobody knows, and they own all of the cars, they travel to all of the countries, they own the big houses that you know, but they're not famous people. These are the boring businesses that we are teaching you, and I am teaching you how to approach so that you can secure your own freedom as well. Anyone can build these businesses, so it's no longer exclusive. It's no longer reserved just for the aristocratic class. The last myth that we're going to talk about here is probably the one that you're most familiar with. And this is the myth of college. Before, the previous generation, they had the idea that you had to go to college and you had to get a job because that was the way that they were taught that was going to be successful as a path for their own children. However, let me give you a bit of the history of college so you understand where this belief comes from. Before the 19th century, college was reserved for a select class of people that were taught to know the knowledge of the world because they were in the ruling class, and so they needed to learn how the world worked. Right? Only select few people went to college. But then the Industrial Revolution started happening, and we discovered the working class, the aristocratic class, the people who owned everything, discovered that the people who were in factories couldn't translate to people who needed to be in offices, right? Because you need people who have a bit more mental capacity, so then we needed to train them to work in offices and not just in factories. So then college was born. We need to send more people to college so that they can become good workers. Did you catch that? Employers started college and sent more people to college so that they could train factory workers to become good workers. Not to train them to become free, but to train them to become effectively pawns of the system. That was the purpose of college. So mass population went to college, were sent to college to become better workers for the employer's benefits. College was never meant to benefit you, nor me. College was intended to benefit free people who owned all of the resources, which is exactly what we're trying to accomplish here in the Freedom Challenge. From the beginning, it was the aristocratic class that benefited from college. So then now, think about college debt. Think about college debt that can only be expunged if you die. Bankruptcy doesn't save you from college debt in America. That should show you that the myth of college, of having to go to college, well, it's not actually for your benefit. So then, how do we make it for your benefit? I want to show you this just before I answer that question. During the time from 1970, which was one of the greatest economic periods of the United States, during the time from 1970 to maybe the 1990s, that was a real great awakening in the US economy, especially after World War II. But the people who kept their jobs, even though they did well, the people who owned businesses, who were able to buy multiple properties, those people did exceptionally better than the people who only kept their jobs. On top of this, I'm going to read this statistic. The cost of college has gone up 30 times in the last 50 years, but income has barely gone up sixfold. I'm going to read this again. The cost of college has gone up 30 times in the last 50 years, yet income has barely increased sixfold. It's a no-brainer. The working class is being squeezed because college was never in their best interest. It was meant to be, we are going to laden or put pressure on the middle class so that they will never attain freedom. but it was never meant to be the great equalizer that we advertise it to be today. No. College was never meant to do that. It was meant to keep people subservient to the system. What we're talking about is freedom from that system. So, you may be wondering, why am I telling you all of this? Because we are talking about 5 different myths, we talked about them, but you need to know, okay, where does this come in? Because you need to understand what freedom is versus security. Think about the people that we talked about earlier. If we can convince an entire world, an entire generation of people that the highest form of freedom that they have is job security, then they will never really truly want to strive for true freedom. Think about this. If college is not teaching you what freedom really means, then you will never even fathom the level of freedom that the aristocratic class enjoys. Being able to travel everywhere, fly first class, have private jets, have multiple houses, being able to be on the beach at Tuesday at 11 a.m. That's another story, but I've experienced that, being on the beach at Tuesday at 11 a.m. when nobody else is there. Most people will never even fathom the amount of freedom that you can have because they're so fixated on job security. But what we are talking about here is true freedom. And this is what I want to show you to have true freedom. These people are truly free, but they don't want you to see how much freedom you can really have. In fact, as we talked about earlier, most people are in a prison of the system's making. So, here's where we're coming to an end. And we're going to have some homework, so listen up for your homework soon. Here's the kicker. Freedom is the ability to decide things in your life for yourself, to have complete control over your time, how you spend it, your destiny, and your own values. If that's you, you're in the right place. Here's your homework to achieve freedom and not security. Write down the 5 myths from today's lesson on a sheet of paper, and then keep going. Write down some things that people have told you about how the world works, because that's what we need to change. You need to see the world differently, which you are now starting to question. For example, another myth that we didn't mention here in our ultimate, in our freedom challenge that we're talking about here, is the harder you work, the more money you earn. Is that true? I would argue no, but I need you to write down reasons why it's not true. Send me an email at reachme@thefulauthor.com with the myths that you found, and I respond. I say good, I'll talk about them, I respond. This is your homework for today. Write down all the myths that you have been told, because you need to see the world differently. Freedom and not security or job security. That's all for today, freedom seekers. I will see you tomorrow. It's been a pleasure. Remember, you're always one decision away. Take care.